Good day, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you for the opportunity to present at GSSA Congress 56. My presentation, titled The Value of Grazing Maize for Sheep as Overwintering Alternative in the Summer Rainfall Areas of South Africa, will be presented as a review on this topic. In the scientific literature, there's not a lot that you can find on this topic. However, a lot in the popular press. But I know that there was a lot of scientific work and good scientific work done on this topic, and I just want to take you through this. As an introduction, we know that sheep farming in the summer rainfall areas of South Africa is largely dependent on veld as its feeding source. The high rainfall areas consist mostly out of mix and sour veld, with its well-known, well-documented nutritional shortfall during the winter, especially for lactating ewes. But on top of that, the autumn lambing season is also a popular production system with sheep farmers due to certain advantages like lower parasite challenges and so forth. The primary aim of sheep production is high productivity, but that rely on high quality nutrition in a cost-effective system. And then in a search for financial viable feeding systems, the system of grazing of unharvested matured maize, or so-called grazing maize, was developed over some years by several researchers, and this is the aim of this talk. As a background, let's just look at the different feeding systems available for overwintering lactating ewes. We can have dryland forage subtropical pastures, but the quality is not always what we need for lactating ewes, and there's a fire hazard. In winter, the dryland cereals and other pasture crops like the radishes, rely a lot on the autumn rainfall, and in this part of the world that we're talking of, the autumn rainfall and follow-up rain in winter is low and unreliable. Irrigated pastures provide a lot of opportunities, but it's costly and you need adequate irrigation water, which is also a restriction. Then we have crop residues, but to have really good high quality, we can just rely on restricted grazing periods. For generations, we know that the use of crop residues, especially maize, was a standard and very cost-effective overwintering practice among sheep farmers. And there was a lot of good publications and a lot of good research work done on that, like Van Pletsen with his MSc in 89, Esthuizen and Niemand and Gartenbach in 1990, but some of this dated back to even in the 70s. The problem with maize crop residues is when you look at the carrying capacities, unfortunately in South Afrikaans the KVE is the carrying capacity. As long as it is for a very short period, you can have a good quality food, high grazing capacities. But when you want to go to 90 days, which is the minimum for overwintering, the carrying capacity really drop, and we've got a very low crude protein content, which is not sufficient for the lactating ewes. So bear with me, please, with the next slide. There's a lot of text on the slide, but I just need to draw your attention to some key challenges and changes that happen in the agricultural environment during the mid-80s to mid-90s. First of all, there was a cost crunch in maize production, and many lands left fallow. That means that maize production on the more marginal soils, the high-risk soils, was not financially viable in the medium or long term. So suddenly, the mixed farming enterprises was valued because they were a lifesaver to a lot of maize producers, and there was a renewed interest in the livestock sector. Government also support with some subsidies the conversion of low potential maize lands to perennial pastures, mostly the perennial subtropicals, which also not address the lactating flock overwintering needs. So there was a lot of pressure for renewed thinking on livestock production systems in mixed farming enterprises, with pressure and a lot of pressure on research to provide answers. The following was recognized. We know the value of maize residues for overwintering. Mixed farms were equipped to cultivate maize. Restricted period of good quality feed on the maize residues. And then there was a stock theft or predator challenge, security challenge, when lactating ewes were left on the extensive croplands. And like predators, jackal can take out a lot of lambs on these croplands overnight. So this was all the challenges. So there was a lot of information on the basic nutritional value of mature maize plants, also on maize silage, on stook maize, maize residues, a lot of publications and work was done on that. So, and then the question was asked, why not let the sheep themselves select the high nutritional parts of maize plants while saving on mechanical costs, such as harvesting, transporting, billing and feeding of animals? And this question was dropped in 83 by Van Pletzen and Oosthuizen, and that gave birth to the whole system of grazing maize. Now, just to let you know, the grazing maize system is where you put lactating ewes or then weaned lambs direct on an unharvested maize land during winter, and they graze there and select what they want, the leaves, and even graze the pips from the cobs. Now, the idea of using grazing maize for overwintering was then initiated in Ermelo, Mpumalanga, with the initial research. The work was done at Nooitgedacht Agricultural Development Center, and also there was a lot of good supporting work done on the local Farmers Agricultural Cooperation, or OTK, or Eastern Transvaal Agricultural Co research farm. Follow-up work continued at Nooitgedacht Research Station, mainly by Moore and his colleagues, but then also at Potchefstroom and Dundee research stations over the next decades. And most of these reports were published as semi-scientific reports, also in the popular media, or just went unpublished. I think it's because it was such a very practical system which can be directly implemented on farms that people just publish semi-scientific or popular. Now, the main management challenges of the grazing maize system was basically two things. There was a protein shortfall. The maize crop standing as it is don't have enough protein to supply the protein needs of the sheep. So we need the protein content of grazing maize is approximately 8% crude protein, and with use with lambs you need about 12%, and for growing weaners 16%. Then also there's a high acidosis risk leading to mortalities. The sheep just bloat when they eat too much maize. So those was the two things that need attention. So there was a lot of research trials over the next decade um, followed to refine this whole system. There wasn't not only just for lactating ewes, meaning ewes and the lambs, but it was also very successfully applied for finishing weaner lambs. And there was good reporting on that by Moore and Miller, Habenga and Creel. Now, to address the challenges and refine the system, the following research work was done. There was work by Moore and Niemand, on protein lick supplementation and the formulation of licks to address this protein shortfall. There was also, at the same time, they start adding buffers to counteract the acidosis. Also work done at Nooitgedal. Supplementation of different protein sources, work done by Leroux and at Potchefstroom Research Station. Then there was very good and very intensive research done on the effect of maize cultivars on grazing maize outcomes by Kriel in 1999. It was an MSc thesis. In short, he concluded that the different cultivars had no effect on UADG, average daily gain, on their growth, but there was a significant difference on pre-land growth. So the little bit higher protein in some cultivars of maize gives a higher ADG in lambs, but only between certain days. It is approximately when the lambs are really start eating well and not live off the depend on their mother's milk. And then cultivars have no effect on wool production. Then there was the null idea of can't we sort out this protein shortage with intercropping of maize with high protein crops such as winter cereals or fodder radish. It was started also by Moore in 1997. Investigations of the suitability of the different companion crops to grazing maize was done at Viljoen since 1994, and then carry on. That was all done at Dundee Research Station up to 2006 by Van Zyl and Sadi. Now, in short, there was challenges. It's very difficult mechanically to intercrop maize, as you can see on this little picture. It's much easier to plant adjacent to the maize, grazing maize area. You plant the companion crop and you then open an area where they can graze both. Now, in short, the crops investigations and investigated and the conclusions. Pink Citadella, grazing maize and veg and these winter cereals were done very good when there's moisture, soil moisture. But so they're highly dependent on good, especially autumn rainfall. Forage summer growers, like cowpeas, dolichos, soya beans that was planted in summer and let mature and let as forage, did very well. Jack radish did also very good and was not so sensitive to soil moisture stress. Just some long-term results with maize and companion crops. You can see in the second column there is maize that was given with a protein buffer lick. Then there was maize and soya, maize and cowpeas, dolichos, oats, ceradella, all the different companion crops. We just look at the grazing capacity. In small stock units, hectares over 100 days. And from all of these different systems, maize come out the best. It can carry the most animals. The lamb ADGs, which is a very important norm, was just below 200 grams per lamb per day. You can see maize and radish did very well. The negative overall conclusion on the maize and companion crops was, due to selective grazing habits of the sheep prefer the companion crops. Therefore, you had to restrict the area of companion crops. Otherwise, sheep will just go for the companion crops, finish that, and then come back to the maize. And then you lose the advantage of your balanced ration that you want. So you have to restrict it, maybe with temporary fences, and open every so many days a little bit more of the companion crop, and that becomes very labor intensive. So because of the high grazing capacity and then the ease of the system, and the successful effect of just the protein containing, buffer containing lick, the maize alone with that lick was preferred. Just a summary of all the results and norms. Um, Very important is to adapt sheep pre-grazing to whole maize, where you start feeding them a small amount and then increase it gradually every day for a period of 2 weeks. You can also let them graze for a short while, but then it's in and out the land. It's also maybe more in labor intensive. Um, you always supply a buffer containing protein lick throughout the grazing period. And then you need to restrict the grazing area or work in smaller camps to maintain the quality of feed. Um, Growth ADGs for lambs between 118 to 50 grams per lamb per day. The ewes do 50 to 100 grams. What is very advantage here, what is the great advantage here is that ewes come actually very fat out of the system, which is then good for the next breeding season. If you use winners that you want to finish, you can between 160 to 200 gram per winner per day. Um, Now, the grazing capacity is strongly related to grain yields. Like 1 ton of maize gives you 1,000 small stock units grazing days. Um, but that was also then decided that is even more important that play around with a little bit more protein um, carrying maize cultivars. Now, the conclusion of all this is grazing maize is an exceptionally good proposition to fill the critical fodder gap in winter for sheep farmers. And you can carry on with the system if you got enough hectares available, even up to the spring rains. A good estimation of the amount of feed can be done beforehand so you can know how many number of animals you can carry through the winter. It's a low-risk, high-quality winter feed, grow in summer rains, and carry over as a forage. And you don't depend on the unreliable autumn rainfalls. However, it's still a crop with a competition. There's a competition in feed and food between humans and animals. However, with the high grazing capacity that this offers us, it won't take away too many hectares of feed for food for humans. My last comment for a conclusion is I think the whole development of the grazing maize system and the opportunities that it opened for overwintering sheep is really a textbook example of the value of what agricultural research can do for agriculture. This is to find a problem, think out of the box, um, develop a system, address the shortfalls and challenges, and there we go. So I'm busy to collecting all the scientific research data um, that's scattered around and reports that I can find for a review publication. So especially at Nooit Gedacht, Potchefstroom, please guys, if you find any reports on grazing maize there or scientific data from the research done there, please forward it to me. With this, I thank you.
Hi everyone, it's Robin Meerske speaking from the Outeniqua Research Farm. Hope everybody is well, and I thank you for the opportunity to share with you some of our results that we have had in the recent past. And the study is about partial replacing of ryegrass with plantain, and also feeding two different levels of concentrate to cows, and to see what effect this will have on milk production and milk composition of Jersey cows during spring. Plantain has become more popular in South Africa and also in the Southern Cape. The reasons are obvious because plantain is more drought resistant, it's got a deeper root system, and it can out yield ryegrass, especially during winter. It has a higher quality, nutritional quality than kikuyu, and sometimes milk production might be increased. Farmers use plantain in their pasture systems, using it in a pure sward, where they would graze plantain maybe during the day and ryegrass during the night. Alternatively, they would use plantain in a pasture mix with ryegrass, red clover, lucerne, and chicory, and this can be in many different combinations. The nutritional value of plantain has been documented by various authors, and we can expect plantain to have a relatively high energy value, reasonable protein value comparable to that of ryegrass, but then a lower NDA value and maybe a slightly higher sugar content. And we have seen reports of higher milk production. Crucial question, however, is what's happening with the effective fiber. And as the NDF is relatively low, and especially when we combine it with concentrates, will there be enough effective fiber to maintain milk fat? So the aim of this study is to determine the effect of partial replacement of ryegrass pasture with plantain pasture during spring, and to see what's the effect on milk production, milk composition of cows fed a low or a high level of concentrate. We're testing the following hypothesis that when replacing ryegrass with plantain or partially replacing ryegrass with plantain, we can expect an increase in milk production, maybe a decrease in milk fat, and also an increase in milk protein. The treatments in this trial were as follows. Pasture treatment, ryegrass during the day, treatment 1, ryegrass during the day, then again ryegrass during the night, and cows fed only 3.5 kilogram of concentrate. Second treatment, the same, ryegrass during the day and ryegrass during the night. Concentrate, however, at 7 kilogram of concentrate per cow per day. Then moving to treatment 3, cows grazed during the day on plantain, during the night on ryegrass, fed 3.5 kilogram of concentrate. And the last treatment, treatment 4, plantain during the day, and then ryegrass at night with 7 kilogram of concentrate. Cows grazed perennial ryegrass, variety 24/7, and we used 8 hectare of plantain agritonic that was in a pure sward. The composition of the concentrate is as follows. It's basically a maize-based concentrate with some high fiber byproducts in it, and then using soybean oil cake as the main protein source. This is would be quite a common concentrate used in our area. The composition of the concentrate is as follows. Crude protein 13.9 for the concentrate on a dry matter basis. ME value should be around 12 in the F18. Starch 46%, calcium 1%, phosphorus 0.41%, and then magnesium 0.4%. In the milk production study, we had a factorial design with 60 cows, 15 cows per treatment. So the two factors, of course, were then the two pasture treatments, ryegrass during day and ryegrass during the night, or plantain during the day and ryegrass at night. And the other factors was then, of course, concentrate level, either being a low or high level of concentrate. Cows were blocked according to milk production and days in milk, and lactation number and allocate to treatments. We had a 15-day adaptation period followed by a 45-day measurement period. The study started on 1st of September 2020 and we ended it at the 31st of October 2020. Cows were milked twice a day in a 20-point swing over dairy parlour, which works very well. It's been upgraded recently. The concentrates were fed during the two milkings, so half of that concentrate, 3.5, and half of the 7 kilogram of concentrate would be fed at each of the two milkings. So we measured milk production daily, milk composition every second week, giving us 4 samples. Cows were weighed and condition scored at the start and at the end of the study. And then we collected samples of concentrate pulled for every 2 weeks, resulting in 4 concentrate samples. Pasture was sampled weekly on Wednesdays during the study, giving us a total of 16 pasture samples, which were then analyzed for nutritional composition. We used the rising plate meter to take readings of each pasture strip before and after grazing to allow us proper pasture allocation. The study was a factorial design where we had pasture base or pasture type as one factor, that then being kikuyu ryegrass day and night, or plantain during the day and ryegrass during the night, and the other factor would be concentrate level, either being at 3.5 or 7 kilogram. We had 15 replicates and 4 treatments. We did an analysis of variance using SAS, and differences were considered to be significant when the p-value was lower than 0.05. Going to the results, when we look at the composition of ryegrass and plantain, also the concentrate, one of the obvious things we see is that the protein on the plantain was lower than we actually expected, only at 13.6 compared to 19.8 for ryegrass. Concentrate tested at 11.5, and if you remember the previous slide, should have been around 13. So it came out lower than we formulated for. ME values, expect also that to be a bit higher, 9.7, 9.9. Concentrates were at least 11.4. NDF levels, expected lower levels of NDF on plantain than we had. We had 38% NDF versus 47 on ryegrass. ADF 33.2 for the plantain and only 30 for ryegrass. Calcium was interesting on plantain. Calcium percentage was 1.38, which is higher than that of ryegrass. Phosphorus 0.32 for plantain and 0.53 for ryegrass. Going to the results, first of all, we did have a look at if there was an interaction between the two factors, being the pasture treatment and the concentrate level, and there was no significant interaction. That's why we present the results first to show what's the effect of pasture treatment on the different parameters. Looking at milk production, no significant difference between ryegrass day and night compared to ryegrass during the night and plantain during the day, being 18.8 and 19.4 liters per cow per day. Fat corrected milk for the ryegrass day and night 21.4, and where the plantain was added 21.7, no significant difference. Milk fat was not affected. Milk protein also not affected. Milk lactose, no significant effect. Milk urea nitrogen level was lower for cows that had the plantain, and this is due to the lower level of protein in the plantain. Live weight gain, however, did not differ during the experimental period between the ryegrass treatments. Then looking at the effect of concentrate on the specific parameters, as we can expect, milk production was increased by the higher level of concentrate feeding. However, the increase in milk production was very disappointing, having 18.4 liters or kilogram milk per cow per day on the 3.5 kgs and going only up to 19.8 kilogram of milk when we fed 7 kilogram of concentrate. This is only 1.4 kilogram of concentrate more, although we add another 3.5 kilogram of concentrate. Fat-corrected milk was also increased, but also by a small margin. Milk fat was not affected by level of concentrate feeding, so was milk protein and milk lactose. The milk urea nitrogen was lower when feeding the higher level of concentrate, and this is now marginal because the minimum level should have been 8 milligram per deciliter, so protein might have limited milk production on the higher level of concentrate feeding. Live weight gain was similar between the two groups. So to conclude, partial replacement of ryegrass with plantain in spring did not affect milk production or milk composition. When looking at the concentrate level, increasing it from 3.5 to 7 kilogram per cow per day, there was an increase in milk production as we can expect. However, this response was poor at only 0.4 kilogram per kilogram of concentrate, 0.4 kilogram of milk per kilogram of concentrate supplemented from 3.5 to 7. So the lesson we can learn out of this is that when pasture quality is high and pasture availability is high, feeding of lower levels of concentrate may be more profitable for the dairy farmer. Thank you for your attention.
Greetings to all that is here to listen to my presentation. My name is Stephen Mudiba. I'm a PDP candidate at the ARC and a PhD candidate at the University of Limpopo. Today I'm here to present to you my study that forms part of my PhD, and it is entitled Evaluation of Brachiaria Grass Accessions for Adaptability and Agronomic Performance under Rain-Fed Conditions in the Northern Region of Gauteng Province, South Africa. This study is supervised by Prof. Ngambi, Dr. Chelele, and Dr. Muller. Moving right along, livestock production contributes significantly to the socio-economic status of smallholder farmers in South Africa. However, due to feed shortage, which occurs mainly during the dry season and leads to a reduction in the productivity of livestock under these farmers, and this in turn has a negative impact on the livelihoods of these farmers. To address the problem of feed shortage, there is a need to evaluate a high-yielding, climate-smart grass species. Grass species from the genus Brachiaria have been identified as climate-smart tropical grasses. This is so because these grasses have the ability to inhibit biological nidification. These grasses also have a large root system. They are tolerant to drought and soils with poor fertility. This enables these grasses to produce high biomass yield with low capital injection in the form of fertilizer and irrigation. However, such information is limited under the climate conditions that prevail in South Africa. The aim of this study was to determine the adaptability, agronomic performance of several brachiaria grass accessions for their potential as alternative forage resources for livestock. The general objective of the study was to determine the agronomic characteristics of brachiaria grass accessions that have potential to produce high dry matter yield without irrigation and fertilizer application. Specific objectives of this study were to determine the agronomic characteristics of brachiaria grass accessions that affect their biomass yield at 50% flowering. The second objective was to determine the effect of exposure to low winter night temperatures of 1 to 5 degrees Celsius and the prevalence of disease and pests on the adaptability of brachiaria grass accessions. This study was conducted at Rotterplat Experiment Farm with the longitude and latitude as indicated. The weather pattern in the study is characterized by hot summer and dry winter with some occasional frost. The rainfall in the study area is as indicated, with the range of 664 mm to 1,325 millimeters. Daily minimum and maximum temperatures in the study site ranges from 16 to 32 in summer and 1 to 23 degrees Celsius in winter. A total of 11 grass accessions composed of 2 locally adapted species as controls and 9 brachiaria grass accessions were used in the study. Out of the 9 brachiaria grass accessions, 5 were breeding lines which were obtained from the International Center for Tropical Agriculture Gene Bank in Colombia, and the other 4, which were improved accessions, were obtained from the International Livestock Research Institute Gene Bank in Kenya. Germinatory seedlings were transplanted to individual field plots and were arranged in a randomized complete design with 3 replicates per accession. The grasses were placed in 2 rows with 0.5 meters apart and with 0.3 meters within a row. The data collected in this study, the agronomic performance and biomass yield of the plants were measured at 50% flowering. During harvesting, some samples were collected for drying in the oven in order to be able to determine the dry matter yield. The data collected was subjected to the general linear model of SPSS by IBM version 28. The following table shows results from soil analysis of samples which were collected on the study sites. Of important to note is on this table is the pH, which is 7.06 to 7.14, collected from 15 to 30 centimeters sample depth. This indicates that the soil in the study area is neutral, and in comparison with other studies, it shows that this soil condition is suitable for brachiaria, since brachiaria has been shown to be able to perform well and adapt under soil with low pH values ranging from 5.1 to 5.7. Results from this study show that all grass accessions recovered from exposure to winter temperatures and the presence of pests and disease such as red spotted spindlebug and grasshoppers, and this did not cause harm, much damage to the grasses, as it to be discussed in table 3. All commercial brachiaria grass accessions or improved grass accessions had a high dry matter yield, with brachiaria decumbens cultivar basilisk producing the highest dry matter yield at 13.79 tons per hectare per year. The highest dry matter yield for a breeding line, which is Brachiaria brisantha CR 1639, was 9.83. However, this was lower than the one produced by Panicum maximum, which was controlled at 10.05 tons per hectare per year. On the pictures here, on the left, it shows red spotted spindlebug and the grasshopper on the right. On the grasses, grasshoppers were more prevalent, and they are the ones who showed signs of feeding on the grass, even though they didn't cause much damage to influence the dry matter yield. This table shows the dry matter yield of brachiaria grass accessions. First of all, we're going to note the grasses that are highlighted in green. Basilisk being an improved accession at the highest yield, total yield, dry matter yield per hectare per year. But in terms of the dry matter yield in tons per harvest, the dry matter was the yield was relatively low compared to Sabia and CR16320 and Piata. This is because the reason basilisk has a high total diameter yield per year is because of its high number of harvest per year, which is 5 harvests per year. Coupled on top of that, basilisk, as we'll be discussing in the next table, has got a high number of tillers that contributes to its biomass yield. Of important to note here again is that dry matter contributes to the variation that exists in the dry matter yield between the accessions that are discussed here, with Piata having the highest dry matter. Another thing to know that is important to note here is that the number of days to first harvest here. Sabia has the highest number of days required to reach 50% and therefore to reach harvest. Hence, it only managed to harvest once per year. So, even though this might be a hiccup to someone who is in need of fresh forage or forage immediately, it might save on cost compared to Panica maximum, which requires a lot of harvest to achieve the high dry matter yield. This might have capital cost requirements for management and harvesting. To ascertain that the number of harvests alone do not contribute to the number of to the yield achieved, you can see the first two, CR169 and CR6384, had the number of harvests per year, but their yield is low. This is because the yield is also dependent on other factors like dry matter, number of tillers, height, and these grasses are of low height in growth habit, and then they also have low tillering numbers. Then we move forward to the next slide to discuss further factors that contribute to the yield as we discuss. Basilisk, as you can see, basilisk has the number of tillering is 136, which is the highest, and there's a significant difference between the number of tillers here which contribute to the yield. The plant height also, there's a significant difference. This plant height also contributes to the yield. As you can see, basilisk doesn't. The height is low, which shows that it's the plant tillering is the one that has more influence on the yield that is achieved, and also coupled with the number of harvests per year. Brachiaria accession have shown signs of adapting by recovering satisfactorily after being exposed to the lowest winter temperatures of 1 to 5 degrees Celsius at night. The high temperature dry matter yield produced by Brachiaria decumbens cultivar bacillus can be attributed to the accession's regrowth rate, plant spread, and tiller numbers as discussed. In conclusion, Brachiaria grass accessions have the potential to provide adequate forage for small ruminants in South Africa. However, evaluation for 2 more growing seasons is needed to obtain conclusive results. I'd like to acknowledge this organization for giving me the opportunity to conduct my study, my PhD study. Thank you.
Good morning. My name is Sigrun Amon from the Western Cape Department of Agriculture, and today I will share with you the temporal changes in herbage yield and botanical composition in forage herb grass binary mixtures. The aim was to use alternative species as intensive pastures other than ryegrass, which is commonly used. So the species we had was perennial ryegrass, cultivar Arrow, cocksfoot, cultivar Adrema, tall fescue, cultivar Bar Optima, chicory, cultivar Choice, and plantain, the cultivar Tonic. And it was about how best to use these forage herbs and grass species to improve yield, both annual yield and seasonal yield. The trial was established at the Outeniqua Research Farm in the Southern Cape on 5 October 2015. The harvesting cycle was determined by perennial ryegrass at the 3-leaf stage, and the data recorded was dry matter yield, botanical composition, and forage quality. The treatment combinations were pure stands of those 5 species, and then binary mixtures of chicory with each of the 3 grasses, plantain with each of the 3 grasses, and then finally chicory and plantain in combination. So the key questions are: how does botanical composition change over time? How does yield change over time, both the annual and seasonal yield? How does composition influence yield? Can mixtures address the autumn gap and the winter yield constraints? And how do we maximize yields with mixtures or pure stands? So is there an advantage? Going straight into the data that we collected, this graph represents the chicory cocksfoot yield and composition. The bars represent the yield. The blue is the chicory, the orange is the cocksfoot yield. Then the lines represent the composition. The dark line is the chicory, and the red line is the cocksfoot, the grass, and the dotted line is the yield trend over time, over the 4 years. So we see that there is a decreasing yield over the 4 years, but only at a slope of minus 1.3. And in fact, the 3rd year yield was higher than the 2nd. And so the yield was relatively stable, although it did decrease. The chicory component in the yield decreased, while the cocksfoot component increased, with quite a large component of year 3 and 4 yield contributed by the cocksfoot. And this is represented also by the composition. So initially, if we look at the dark line, the sward is dominated by chicory, and that decreases, especially after year 2. And the cocksfoot composition increases its component. It reaches the 50-50 composition after about 2.5 years, and thereafter the cocksfoot increases to 70%, while the chicory decreases to about 30%. Looking at the chicory tall fescue data, the yield also decreases over time, but at a slightly lower rate. The yield is dominated in year 1 and 2 by chicory, and then in year 3 and 4 by the tall fescue. The composition, which is represented by the lines, is very similar to the previous graph, where it reaches a 50-50 at about 2.5 to 3 years after initially being dominated completely by chicory, and then eventually ends up at a 70-30 grass dominant sward in the 4th year. The chicory perennial ryegrass is a slightly different picture. Again, the chicory dominates the yield in year 1 and 2. Even going through to year 4, it still dominates, although the yield decrease is quite dramatic over those 4 years. And the perennial ryegrass, represented by the red line, never dominates the sward and is the minor component of the sward. The chicory does dominate, but the chicory loses plants from year 2 onwards, which means there is a decrease in population, which is represented by the blue dotted line. So we can see up to year 2, the population is around 100% of the sward, and then it starts to decrease dramatically. So in the end, we end up with only 50% population, which is reflected by a decrease in both the perennial ryegrass plants after the 2nd summer and the chicory plants also decreasing in number after the 2nd year. Moving on to the plantain cocksfoot. Again, the plantain is represented by the dark blue, the cocksfoot by the orange bars in terms of yield, and the lines represent the composition. The yield initially is dominated by plantain, but the grass component does increase in year 3 and 4 and also contributes more to the yield. So initially the composition is dominated by plantain in the first 2 years, and the grass is really a minor component at about 10%, but then increases to about a 60-40 and then moving towards a 50-50 by the end of year 4. Again, the yield declines over the 4 years, represented by the dotted line, and the decline is similar to the other graphs, but we start at a higher base here of about 26 tons dry matter per annum in the first year, and then ending at about 16 tons. So the yield overall is higher, even though the decline is similar. For plantain tall fescue, the plantain is even more dominant. The fescue really contributes very little to the yield in year 1 and 2, and the composition shows that as well. The red line is the fescue composition, which only really starts to get going after year 2. In year 3, it is about a 70 plantain, 30 tall fescue, and then it moves towards a 60-40 and ultimately probably ending at a 50-50 at the end. Again, this drop in yield represented by the dotted line, but again starting at this high base of 26 tons, which is mainly a function of the plantain, but endings lower than the plantain coxfoot at around 13.5 tons. The plantain perennial ryegrass, the perennial ryegrass could really not compete, and the yields dominated by the plantain. The red line representing the perennial ryegrass composition, which really never contributes above 30%, and that is also reflected in the yield, so not competitive in this situation, in this combination. If we look at seasonal yield, we see that, as we would expect, the yield is always highest in the spring and summer months for all those different species. These are the pure stands. The chicory and plantain are represented by the dotted lines, and the solid lines are the 3 different grasses. We can clearly see the red line being the plantain is the best yielding species, and that is followed really later in the 3rd and 4th year by the coxfoot being the green line, and the light blue solid line being the perennial ryegrass is really quite low, except that it does contribute in the winter months, but ultimately not really contributing that much in the warmer months of the year. So we see the tall fescue also has its limitations in the winter months, and that is really a function of the particular cultivar, which was fairly winter dormant and not really then contributing to the yield much in the winter months, just as the chicory is unable to really contribute significantly in the winter months. So the best contribution in autumn and winter came really from plantain and from coxfoot, and to some extent from perennial ryegrass, but with its other limitations. Looking at the seasonal yield of the mixtures, the dotted lines are the mixtures represented with chicory grass, and the solid lines are plantain grass, and the black line is the chicory plantain. And we clearly see that the plantain grass mixtures are superior to the chicory grass mixtures, so the solid lines are the ones that have the higher yields, except in the 2nd and 3rd year we also see the chicory coxfoot, that dotted blue line, to be quite high up on the graph, but that was mainly due to the coxfoot yield and not so much the chicory at all. At that stage the chicory component has decreased quite substantially. So the superior mixtures in terms of seasonal yield are really the plantain grass mixtures, but the the least yielding being the plantain perennial ryegrass. Finally, to look at the total yield over 53 months, the pure stand plantain, being the second bar, gave 91 tons dry matter over 53 months, and the plantain coxford gave similarly just under 90 tons, the second highest yield. But again, most of that yield, as we have seen, would have come from the plantain in the first 2 years. The plantain perennial ryegrass graph being the second to last bar here also looks fairly reasonable, but again, that yield is mostly plantain and not much perennial ryegrass. So there is a case for pure stand plantain and for a plantain grass mix, but with the correct grass of the correct cultivar of a specific species. Finally, the highest yield was the plantain pure stand and the plantain coxford. In terms of botanical composition for chicory, coxford chicory fescue, the chicory first was dominant. It reached a 50-50 and ultimately a 70-30 where the grass was dominant, and we still retained 100% population. The chicory perennial ryegrass, chicory dominated perennial ryegrass remained the minor component throughout, and we had a decline in population. With the plantain coxford and plantain tall fescue, the plantain was very dominant in the first 2 years, above 90%, and it ultimately went to a 55-45. For the plantain perennial ryegrass, the plantain dominated throughout, and the perennial ryegrass was hardly able to compete. The chicory decreases from the 3rd year onwards, while the plantain is more persistent. In terms of the grass component, the coxford and tall fescue start as minor components, but they increase to approximately a 50-50 composition over time. The perennial ryegrass, as I said, is not competitive, and the choice of cultivar must fit the mixture. So for tall fescue, it must be upright growing and more winter active, unlike the one used in this trial. And the perennial ryegrass similarly must be more upright growing and possibly a tetraploid that might be more competitive. The forage herb component must be a winter active cultivar. Finally, in terms of yield, only the grass component is less important, but could it be different if we analyze the forage quality? Maybe we see the importance of the grass component. It also provides diversity and the benefits associated with that. It improves ground cover, and we need to investigate if the grass component should be added in year 3 only, or basically at a later stage and not right at the beginning. Thank you.